The key card that would destroy two families forever trembled in Rohit Sharma's hand as he stood outside room 412 of the Marriott downtown Houston, listening to his wife's laughter mixing with a man's voice he knew as well as his own brother's. The sound that should have brought him joy instead felt like shards of glass piercing through 12 years of marriage, 12 years of believing that arranged love could bloom into something eternal and unbreakable in the fertile ground of shared culture, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment to family honor that had been the foundation of their life together in America. Rohit had arrived at this moment through a series of coincidences that seemed orchestrated by a cruel universe determined to shatter his carefully constructed world. His early return from the quarterly audit in Dallas, the forgotten anniversary gift he had rushed to retrieve from their Memorial area home, the glimpse of Anjali's car in the hotel parking lot, where she had claimed to be shopping with her sister Mira at the Galleria. Each detail had stacked upon the next like dominoes, falling toward this inevitable moment of devastating clarity about the woman he had loved, without question, since their families had first introduced them in a traditional ceremony that promised lifetime partnership built on trust, shared values, and mutual dedication to preserving the cultural heritage they were raising their children to honor. The drive from their suburban Houston home to this downtown hotel had taken 37 minutes through traffic that seemed determined to delay his arrival, giving him time to construct increasingly desperate explanations for why Anjali's Honda Accord would be parked outside a luxury hotel on a Tuesday afternoon when she had specifically told him she would be spending the day shopping for their daughter Kavya's upcoming birthday celebration. The rational part of his mind had cycled through possibilities: a surprise party preparation, a meeting with party planners, even a charitable event she had forgotten to mention during their hurried breakfast conversation about his extended business trip that had kept him away from home for 6 days. The registration that had granted him access to the hotel floor had required him to show identification and explain his purpose to security personnel, who seemed suspicious of his agitation and his insistence that he needed to locate his wife, who was supposedly attending a business meeting in the building. His explanation that he was bringing her forgotten medication had seemed plausible enough to convince the desk clerk to verify that Mrs. Anjali Sharma was indeed a registered guest in room 412, though the information about her companion remained confidential according to hotel policy. The elevator ride to the 4th floor had felt like an ascent into a nightmare realm where the fundamental assumptions about his life would be tested against evidence that his rational mind still refused to fully accept. 12 years of marriage had created patterns and expectations that made infidelity seem impossible, particularly given their shared commitment to traditional values that emphasized family honor above individual desires, and their active participation in the Hindu community that provided both spiritual guidance and social accountability for maintaining marital sanctity. The hallway leading to room 412 stretched before him like a corridor toward Judgment Day, with each step forcing him to confront the growing certainty that his wife's presence in this hotel was not innocent, and that the male voice he could now distinguish through the door belonged to Daniel Mehta, their neighbor and family friend, whose own marriage to Priya had seemed as stable and traditional as their own, whose children played with Kavya, and whose family joined theirs for Diwali celebrations and weekend barbecues that reinforced the bonds of community that were supposed to protect against the moral compromises that destroyed families. The conversation he could hear through the door was too muffled to understand completely, but the tone was intimate and familiar in ways that suggested this meeting was not their first clandestine encounter. Anjali's voice carried the musical quality he had always loved, but directed toward another man with an affection and enthusiasm that had been absent from their own interactions for months, replaced by the polite efficiency of shared household management and child-rearing responsibilities that had gradually consumed the romantic elements of their relationship without his conscious awareness of the transformation. The decision to use the keycard rather than knocking represented a choice between giving them opportunity to compose themselves and confront them with evidence of behavior that could not be explained away through creative storytelling or claims of innocent coincidence. His accountant's mind understood that verification required direct observation, while his husband's heart hoped desperately that opening this door would reveal something other than the betrayal that seemed increasingly certain with each passing second of intimate conversation between his wife and their family friend. The physical sensation of inserting the keycard and hearing the electronic lock disengage felt like crossing a threshold from which there could be no return to the comfortable assumptions about fidelity and family honor that had governed his understanding of their marriage and his place within the Indian American community that had embraced them as an exemplary couple whose traditional values and professional success represented the best possibilities for maintaining cultural identity while pursuing American dreams of prosperity and social mobility. The scene that greeted Rohit when the hotel room door swung open would be forever burned into his memory with the clarity of a photograph. Anjali, sitting on the edge of the bed in clothes he had never seen before, her hair styled differently than she ever wore at home, laughing at something Daniel Mehta was saying as he stood by the window holding 2 glasses of wine with an intimacy that spoke of familiarity and comfort that could only have developed through repeated secret meetings that had been hidden behind the facade of routine family life and neighborhood friendship. The silence that followed his entrance was absolute and devastating, broken only by the sound of Daniel dropping one of the wine glasses onto the carpet while Anjali's face transformed from joy to horror in the span of seconds that stretched into eternity, as all 3 of them recognized that this moment would irrevocably alter the trajectory of their families, their community relationships, and their individual futures in ways that none of them had fully considered when they had begun whatever arrangement had led to this clandestine afternoon meeting. Anjali's first words were not an explanation or an apology, but a shocked whisper of, "Rohit, you're supposed to be in Dallas," as if the primary violation was his unexpected presence rather than her betrayal of their marriage vows and the trust that had been the foundation of their relationship since their families had arranged their meeting 12 years earlier, with the blessing of elders who had believed that shared values and cultural compatibility would provide sufficient foundation for lifetime partnership and mutual devotion. Daniel's response was equally telling in its focus on logistics rather than morality. "We thought you wouldn't be back until Thursday," revealing that their affair was not a spontaneous moment of weakness, but a carefully planned deception that required coordination of schedules and alibis that had allowed them to maintain their secret relationship while preserving the appearance of respectability within their families and their tight-knit community of Indian American professionals and families. The emotional impact of discovering his wife's infidelity was complicated by the realization that Daniel Mehta was not a stranger or casual acquaintance, but someone who had been welcomed into their home for family dinners, someone whose children had played with Kavya in their backyard, someone who had offered advice about business ventures, and whose wife, Priya, had become close friends with Anjali through their shared experiences as Indian women navigating American culture while maintaining traditional family responsibilities and cultural identity. The practical implications of the discovery began to flood Rohit's consciousness, even as he struggled to process the emotional devastation, the need to consider their daughter Kavya's welfare, the impact on both extended families who had invested in their marriage as a symbol of successful cultural adaptation, the professional consequences within their community where reputation and family honor influenced business relationships and social standing among second-generation Indian Americans who balanced traditional expectations with modern American individualism. The hotel room itself seemed to mock the sanctity of marriage with its anonymous luxury and temporary convenience that had facilitated their betrayal, providing a neutral space where they could pursue their affair without the risk of discovery in familiar locations that might expose them to neighbors, friends, or family members who would recognize the moral violation and demand accountability, according to traditional standards that still governed much of their community's social expectations and cultural norms. Daniel's attempt to explain the situation began with stammered apologies and claims about emotional connection and loneliness that rang hollow against the evidence of systematic deception that had been required to maintain their affair while preserving their marriages and community relationships. His words revealed not momentary weakness, but deliberate choices to prioritize personal desire over family obligations and community standards that had been central to their upbringing and cultural identity as Indian Americans. Anjali's tears began to flow as the reality of being caught settled into full awareness of the consequences that would extend far beyond their marriage to include their daughter's stability, their family's reputations, and their standing within the Hindu temple community that had been central to their social and spiritual lives since arriving in Houston 12 years earlier, with dreams of building successful American lives while maintaining connection to their cultural heritage and traditional values. The confrontation that followed was conducted in whispered voices that reflected their awareness that hotel walls were thin and that public exposure of their private crisis would multiply the consequences exponentially, forcing them to maintain some semblance of dignity and control, even while navigating the emotional devastation and practical complications that would require immediate decisions about disclosure, separation, and the complex logistics of untangling 12 years of shared life, including financial arrangements, custody considerations, and community relationships. The immediate aftermath of the hotel room confrontation was marked by a surreal calmness that belied the emotional devastation coursing through all three participants as they attempted to navigate the practical necessities of leaving the hotel without creating a public scene that would expose their private crisis to strangers who might recognize them from their professional or community circles within Houston's interconnected Indian American social network. Daniel's departure from the hotel room was hurried and awkward, marked by his inability to look directly at Rohit, while offering meaningless apologies that failed to address the systematic nature of his betrayal or acknowledge the devastating impact his actions would have on both families, particularly the children who had no awareness that their father's friendship and their family's social connections were about to be destroyed by adult decisions that prioritized personal gratification over community stability and family welfare. Anjali's attempts to explain her behavior began with claims about loneliness and emotional neglect that Rohit had difficulty recognizing in their marriage, though her words forced him to confront the possibility that his dedication to work and his assumption that financial security and cultural stability were sufficient expressions of love had created an emotional vacuum that had made her vulnerable to Daniel's attention and the excitement of forbidden romance that their affair had provided. The drive home from the hotel was conducted in silence that allowed both of them to begin processing the magnitude of change that this discovery would bring to their carefully constructed life, including the immediate necessity of deciding whether to attempt reconciliation or proceed with separation, while considering the impact on their 11-year-old daughter Kavya, whose stable world was about to be disrupted by adult conflicts she could not understand or influence. The decision to maintain normal routines for the remainder of the day was driven by their shared desire to protect Kavya from immediate knowledge of the crisis, while they determined how to handle the practical and emotional challenges, either rebuilding their marriage or managing the complex process of separation within a cultural context that stigmatized divorce and placed enormous pressure on couples to resolve their differences through family intervention and community mediation. Rohit's phone call to his older brother Vikash in Chicago represented his first attempt to seek guidance from family members who understood both American legal realities and traditional Indian expectations about marriage, infidelity, and family honor, though the conversation revealed the complexity of navigating cultural obligations that demanded both preservation of family reputation and accountability for moral violations that threatened community standards and social stability. The conversation with Vikash lasted over an hour and included detailed discussion of potential approaches, ranging from immediate confrontation with both extended families to quiet attempts at marriage counseling that might preserve their relationship, while addressing the underlying issues that had contributed to Anjali's affair, though both brothers recognized that the involvement of Daniel Mehta as a family friend and neighbor complicated any resolution that required maintaining community relationships. Anjali's parallel conversation with her closest friend and confidant, Mira, revealed the depth of her emotional dissatisfaction with their marriage and her awareness that the affair with Daniel had been a symptom of larger problems rather than the cause of their marital difficulties, though she also expressed genuine remorse about the deceptive methods she had employed and her failure to address her concerns through honest communication before seeking emotional fulfillment elsewhere. The community implications of their crisis began to emerge through phone calls from friends and neighbors who had noticed unusual activities and schedule changes that now seemed suspicious in retrospect, including Priya Mehta's indirect inquiries about Daniel's recent travel schedule and Anjali's availability for their usual shopping excursions that had been curtailed during the period when the affair was most active and required careful coordination of alibis and alternative activities. The psychological impact on Rohit included not only the emotional devastation of betrayal, but also the professional embarrassment of having failed to recognize signs of his wife's dissatisfaction, despite his analytical skills as an accountant who was trained to detect inconsistencies and patterns that indicated underlying problems in complex systems, leading to self-doubt about his judgment and his ability to maintain the personal relationships that were essential to his cultural identity and family responsibilities. The financial implications of their crisis extended beyond potential divorce costs to include the impact on their shared business ventures and investment properties that had been purchased with the assumption of lifetime partnership, as well as the complex considerations involving Kavya's educational expenses and their obligations to extended family members in India who had contributed to their American success story and expected continued stability and prosperity from their overseas relatives. The evening routine with Kavya required both parents to maintain facades of normalcy while internally processing the devastation of their marriage and beginning to consider how to explain complex adult relationships and moral failures to a child whose understanding of family was based on stability, trust, and the cultural values that had been central to her upbringing in their Houston suburb, where Indian traditions were preserved alongside American opportunities and social mobility. The confrontation with Daniel Mehta's wife Priya took place 3 days after the hotel discovery, when Rohit made the difficult decision to inform her about her husband's affair, recognizing that she deserved to know the truth, despite the additional pain and community disruption that full disclosure would create within their interconnected network of Indian American families who had built their social lives around assumptions of marital stability and shared cultural values. Priya's initial reaction was denial, followed by a devastating recognition that unexplained absences and behavioral changes in her husband had been indicators of infidelity that she had chosen to rationalize rather than investigate, leading to a painful conversation about the ways that cultural expectations about trusting spouses and maintaining family harmony could enable deception and prevent early intervention in relationships that were deteriorating behind facades of respectability and community engagement. The revelation to Priya unleashed a torrent of additional information about Daniel's behavior that Rohit had not previously known, including financial irregularities in their family business that suggested the affair had been funded through diverted resources that should have supported both their families, creating legal and ethical complications that extended the crisis beyond personal relationships into potential criminal behavior that would require investigation by both families and possibly law enforcement authorities. The community response to news of the affair was swift and devastating for both families, as information spread through their social network despite attempts at privacy and discretion, leading to social isolation and professional consequences that affected their children's friendships, their business relationships, and their standing within the Hindu temple community that had been central to their spiritual and social lives since establishing themselves in Houston 12 years earlier. Detective Laura Simmons of the Houston Police Department became involved in the case when Priya Mehta filed a complaint about financial irregularities that appeared to be connected to Daniel's affair, including unauthorized use of business, credit cards, and diversion of funds from their joint accounts that had been used to finance hotel rooms, gifts, and other expenses associated with maintaining his relationship with Anjali while concealing his activities from his wife and business partners. The investigation revealed the sophisticated nature of Daniel's deception, including the creation of false business travel schedules and fictional client meetings that had provided alibis for his afternoon encounters with Anjali, demonstrating a level of premeditation and systematic dishonesty that extended far beyond momentary moral weakness into deliberate criminal activity that had endangered both families' financial security and legal standing. Anjali's cooperation with the investigation was reluctant, but necessary, as her testimony provided crucial details about the extent of Daniel's financial misconduct, while also revealing her own awareness that their affair was being funded through potentially illegal means, raising questions about her moral culpability and legal liability that complicated efforts to rebuild her marriage with Rohit or establish credibility as a reliable witness against her former lover. The impact on their children became impossible to ignore, as Kavya began experiencing social difficulties at school where classmates had heard their parents discussing the scandal, while Daniel and Priya's children faced similar challenges that were compounded by the additional stress of potential criminal charges against their father and the possibility of significant financial losses that could affect their educational opportunities and social stability. The extended family involvement intensified as both sets of parents arrived from India and Chicago to provide support and guidance, while also expressing disappointment and shame about the public nature of the crisis that reflected poorly on their family's reputation within the broader Indian American community, where personal scandals were seen as failures of cultural transmission and parental guidance that had allowed American individualism to corrupt traditional values and family loyalty. The marriage counseling that Rohit and Anjali attempted was complicated by the ongoing criminal investigation and the community pressure for either complete reconciliation or definitive separation that would allow both families to begin rebuilding their reputations and social relationships within their cultural community, though the counselor's recommendations for patience and gradual trust building conflicted with cultural expectations for rapid resolution of moral conflicts. The business consequences for Rohit included scrutiny of his own professional activities by colleagues and clients, who questioned whether his failure to recognize his wife's deception indicated similar blind spots in his accounting work, leading to lost contracts and professional embarrassment that threatened the financial stability he had worked 12 years to establish in the competitive Houston energy sector, where personal reputation was closely connected to professional success. The legal complexities surrounding Daniel's financial misconduct created additional stress for both families as they navigated the intersection of civil and criminal law, while also managing the cultural expectations that demanded either complete forgiveness or total severance of relationships, with little accommodation for the gradual processes of legal resolution and emotional healing that would be required to address the multiple violations of trust and community standards that had been revealed through the investigation. The criminal charges filed against Daniel Mehta 6 weeks after the hotel confrontation included embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft related to his systematic misuse of business resources to finance his affair, creating legal precedents that would affect how similar cases involving adultery and financial crime were prosecuted within Texas jurisdiction, while also establishing the serious criminal consequences that could result from seemingly personal moral failures that involved misappropriation of shared resources. The plea negotiations between Daniel's defense attorney and the Harris County District Attorney's Office revealed the extensive nature of his financial crimes, including fraudulent business expense reports, unauthorized use of corporate credit cards, and the creation of shell companies designed to hide the transfer of funds from his legitimate logistics business to accounts that supported his affair-related expenses, demonstrating criminal sophistication that suggested his deception had been planned and systematic rather than impulsive or emotional. Anjali's role as a potential accessory to Daniel's crimes became a central issue in the investigation as prosecutors examined her awareness of the source of funds that had supported their relationship, including expensive gifts, hotel stays, and restaurant meals that exceeded what Daniel could afford through legitimate income, raising questions about her legal culpability and moral responsibility that complicated her efforts to rebuild her marriage while cooperating with law enforcement authorities. The community's response to the criminal charges was divided between those who viewed Daniel's behavior as an isolated moral failure that reflected personal weakness rather than systematic dishonesty, and others who saw his crimes as evidence of deeper cultural problems within their Indian American community, where pressure to maintain appearances of success and respectability could lead to desperate measures and financial misconduct when personal relationships became complicated by American individualism and moral relativism. The impact on Priya Mehta and her children was devastating as the criminal investigation revealed the extent of her husband's financial misconduct and the potential loss of their family business, their home, and their children's educational funds, forcing her to seek employment for the first time since her marriage, while also managing the social stigma and practical challenges of single parenthood within a cultural context that provided limited support for divorced women and their children. The victim impact statements prepared by both families documented not only the financial losses caused by Daniel's crimes, but also the psychological damage and social isolation that resulted from the destruction of trust and reputation within their community, providing legal documentation of the comprehensive harm caused by actions that had begun as personal moral failures, but escalated into criminal activity that affected multiple families and community institutions. The sentencing phase of Daniel's criminal case attracted significant media attention within Houston's Indian American community, as it represented one of the first high-profile cases involving white-collar crime that had grown out of marital infidelity, establishing legal precedents for how cultural factors and community standards would be considered in determining appropriate punishment for crimes that violated both legal and traditional moral codes. Detective Laura Simmons's investigation also revealed connections between Daniel's case and other similar incidents within Houston's South Asian business community, suggesting patterns of financial misconduct that exploited cultural networks and trust relationships for criminal purposes, leading to enhanced scrutiny of business practices and financial oversight within immigrant communities where informal arrangements and family-based business structures could be vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court as part of Daniel's sentencing process revealed personality traits and behavioral patterns that explained his ability to maintain intimate relationships while systematically deceiving multiple people about his financial activities and moral commitments, providing insights into the psychological factors that enabled sophisticated deception and the exploitation of trust relationships within close-knit cultural communities. The restitution arrangements required Daniel to repay not only the funds he had stolen from his business, but also the costs incurred by both families for legal representation, investigation services, and therapeutic counseling, creating financial obligations that would extend for years beyond his criminal sentence, while also establishing precedents for holding perpetrators accountable for the comprehensive damage caused by their actions. The professional consequences for Daniel included the loss of his logistics, business license, and exclusion from industry associations that required members to maintain ethical standards and criminal background clearances, effectively ending his career in the transportation and logistics sector, while also serving as a warning to other business owners about the professional consequences of criminal activity that grew out of personal moral failures. The impact on Houston's Indian American business community included enhanced scrutiny from financial institutions and regulatory agencies concerned about patterns of misconduct that might indicate systematic problems with oversight and accountability within immigrant business networks, leading to additional compliance requirements and monitoring procedures that affected legitimate businesses while providing protection against future criminal activity and financial fraud. The divorce proceedings between Rohit and Anjali Sharma began 8 months after the hotel confrontation, after marriage counseling and family mediation efforts had failed to rebuild sufficient trust and emotional connection to sustain their relationship, despite pressure from both extended families who viewed divorce as a failure of cultural values and a source of lasting shame that would affect future generations and their standing within the broader Indian American community in Houston and beyond. The custody arrangements for their daughter Kavya became the most contentious aspect of their divorce proceedings, as both parents recognized that their choices about visitation schedules and residential arrangements would significantly impact her psychological adjustment and cultural identity during the critical pre-teenage years when she was already struggling to understand the adult conflicts that had destroyed her family's stability and social relationships within their community. Anjali's decision to seek full custody was based on her argument that Rohit's work schedule and emotional unavailability had contributed to their marital problems and would limit his effectiveness as a primary caregiver, though her own involvement in the affair and the ongoing criminal investigation of Daniel Mehta raised questions about her judgment and moral fitness that complicated her legal position despite her genuine commitment to their daughter's welfare and cultural education. The financial settlement negotiations were complicated by the losses both families had incurred due to Daniel's criminal activities and the legal expenses associated with the divorce proceedings, creating economic pressures that forced both Rohit and Anjali to consider practical compromises that might not serve their individual interests, but were necessary to preserve resources for Kavya's future education and the extended family members who had provided emotional and financial support during their crisis. The community mediation process, organized by their Hindu temple, attempted to provide culturally appropriate alternatives to the American legal system for resolving their marital conflicts, though the religious and cultural authorities struggled to address the complex intersection of adultery, criminal activity, and child welfare within traditional frameworks that had been developed for simpler conflicts that did not involve law enforcement and public scandal that had damaged their community's reputation. Rohit's decision to relocate to Dallas for a new position with an energy consulting firm represented his attempt to escape the social stigma and professional consequences he had experienced in Houston, while also providing Kavya with opportunities to build new relationships and cultural connections that were not overshadowed by the scandals surrounding their family, though the move created additional logistics challenges for maintaining his relationship with his daughter and his obligations to extended family members. The psychological counseling that Kavya received focused on helping her understand and process the adult conflicts that had disrupted her life, while also preserving her positive relationships with both parents, despite their inability to maintain their marriage, requiring therapeutic approaches that respected her Indian cultural identity while addressing the American social context in which she was developing her understanding of family relationships and moral values. Anjali's efforts to rebuild her life included returning to full-time employment in retail management and pursuing additional education in business administration that would enhance her career prospects and provide financial independence that had been lacking during her marriage, though her involvement in the Daniel Mehta scandal continued to affect her professional opportunities and social relationships within Houston's Indian American business community. The long-term impact on both extended families included strained relationships between the Sharma and Patel families, who blamed each other for the moral failures and cultural betrayals that had led to the destruction of a marriage that had been intended to strengthen both family lineages and serve as an example of successful cultural adaptation within the American context, while preserving traditional values and community connections. The ripple effects of their divorce extended throughout Houston's Indian American social network, as other couples examined their own relationships for signs of similar problems, while also implementing additional safeguards and communication strategies designed to prevent the emotional distance and cultural conflicts that had contributed to Anjali's affair and the subsequent destruction of two families and their community standing. The legal precedents established through their divorce proceedings influenced how similar cases involving adultery, criminal activity, and cultural factors would be handled by Texas family courts, particularly regarding the weight given to traditional cultural expectations versus American legal standards in determining child custody and financial arrangements for immigrant families, navigating complex intersections of different value systems and legal frameworks. The ongoing therapy and counseling required for all family members created additional financial burdens and time commitments that complicated their efforts to rebuild their individual lives while maintaining their cultural connections and family relationships, demonstrating the long-term costs of moral failures and criminal activities that extended far beyond the immediate consequences of legal proceedings and social stigma. The sentencing of Daniel Mehta to 4 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud marked a turning point in the community's understanding of how personal moral failures could escalate into serious criminal activity that affected multiple families and business relationships within Houston's tight-knit Indian American social network, while also establishing legal precedents for prosecuting white-collar crimes that originated in extramarital affairs and cultural deception. Priya Mehta's decision to divorce Daniel while he served his prison sentence was influenced by both the financial devastation his crimes had caused their family and the social impossibility of rebuilding their reputation within their community while remaining married to someone whose criminal activities had betrayed not only his family but also the trust and business relationships that were essential to their social and economic survival in American society. The bankruptcy proceedings that followed Daniel's criminal conviction revealed the full extent of his financial misconduct, including hidden debts and fraudulent business arrangements that had been used to maintain his affair with Anjali, while concealing the true state of his family's finances from his wife and business partners, creating legal complications that would require years to resolve, and leaving multiple families struggling with unexpected financial obligations and damaged credit ratings. The community's efforts to provide support for the affected families were complicated by cultural tensions between traditional expectations about family loyalty and moral accountability versus American legal and social frameworks that emphasized individual responsibility and the separation of personal and community obligations, creating conflicts about appropriate responses to crimes that had violated both legal and cultural standards simultaneously. Kavia's adjustment to her parents' divorce and her father's relocation to Dallas required ongoing therapeutic support and careful coordination between her parents to maintain stability and cultural connections, while she navigated the social challenges of being associated with a family scandal that had become well known within Houston's Indian American community and had affected her friendships and social relationships at school and within their temple community. The professional rehabilitation efforts undertaken by both Rohit and Anjali included career counseling and additional education designed to help them rebuild their professional reputations and financial stability after the damage caused by their association with Daniel's criminal activities and the public nature of their marital conflict, though both discovered that the social stigma associated with divorce and scandal within their cultural community created ongoing challenges for business relationships and career advancement. The legal resolution of civil claims related to Daniel's embezzlement required complex negotiations between multiple parties, including his former business partners, creditors, and the families who had been financially harmed by his activities, creating a lengthy process that provided partial compensation for some losses while establishing legal frameworks for addressing similar cases involving the intersection of personal relationships and business fraud within immigrant communities. The impact on the children of all three families was documented through psychological evaluations and educational assessments that revealed both short-term disruptions in academic performance and social relationships, as well as longer-term concerns about trust, family stability, and cultural identity that would require ongoing support and intervention to prevent lasting damage to their emotional development and social integration. The marriage counseling and family therapy resources that were developed in response to this case provided culturally sensitive approaches to addressing conflicts between traditional Indian values and American social pressures that could contribute to marital problems and moral failures, offering preventive interventions and early warning systems that might help other families avoid similar destructive conflicts and criminal activities. The community education initiatives that emerged from this scandal included workshops and discussion groups focused on financial transparency within marriages, communication strategies for addressing cultural conflicts, and early intervention approaches for couples experiencing emotional distance or moral conflicts that might escalate into affairs or criminal activity if not addressed through appropriate counseling and community support. The business ethics training programs that were implemented within Houston's Indian American business community included enhanced oversight procedures, financial transparency requirements, and professional accountability measures designed to prevent similar cases of embezzlement and fraud, while also providing cultural frameworks for addressing moral conflicts and personal crises that might affect business relationships and professional responsibilities. The ongoing monitoring and support provided to all affected families included regular check-ins with social services, educational advocates for the children, and community liaisons who helped maintain cultural connections while addressing the practical challenges of rebuilding their lives after experiencing the devastating consequences of adultery, criminal activity, and the destruction of trust relationships that had been central to their social and economic survival in American society. The 3-year anniversary of the hotel room discovery marked a significant milestone in the healing process for all affected families, as they had begun to establish new routines and relationships while continuing to deal with the ongoing consequences of Daniel's criminal activities and the community trauma that had resulted from the destruction of trust and social cohesion within their Indian American neighborhood and temple community. Rohit's successful establishment of his consulting practice in Dallas had provided him with financial stability and professional recognition that helped restore his confidence and social standing, though his relationship with Kavya continued to require careful coordination with Anjali and ongoing therapeutic support to address the impact of their family disruption on her academic performance, cultural identity, and social relationships with peers who might be aware of their family's scandal. Anjali's completion of her business administration degree and promotion to regional management within her retail company represented significant personal achievement and financial independence, though she continued to face social isolation within Houston's Indian American community, where her involvement in the affair and the subsequent criminal investigation had damaged her reputation and limited her opportunities for cultural engagement and social relationships. Kavya's adjustment to her parents' divorce and her father's absence had been facilitated by consistent therapy and strong academic support, though her understanding of the adult conflicts that had destroyed their family remained limited and would require ongoing guidance as she matured and began to ask more sophisticated questions about family loyalty, cultural values, and the moral choices that had led to such devastating consequences for everyone she loved. The community's response to similar situations had been influenced by the precedents established through this case, with enhanced emphasis on marriage counseling, financial transparency, and early intervention for couples experiencing cultural conflicts or emotional distance that might escalate into affairs or criminal activity if not addressed through appropriate therapeutic and community support services. Daniel's release from federal prison after serving 3 years of his 4-year sentence was marked by his deportation proceedings and permanent exclusion from the business community that had once respected him as a successful entrepreneur. While his children struggled to maintain relationships with their father while understanding the criminal activities that had destroyed their family's financial security and social standing, Priya Mehta's successful rebuilding of her life included securing employment in healthcare administration and establishing financial independence that provided stability for her children while they continued their education and worked to overcome the social stigma associated with their father's criminal activities. Though their ongoing therapy addressed complex emotions about family loyalty, personal responsibility, and cultural expectations about forgiveness and moral accountability. The legal resolution of remaining civil claims and restitution obligations created a framework for ongoing financial accountability that would extend for several more years as Daniel worked to repay the funds he had stolen and the legal costs incurred by all affected families, though the full restoration of their financial losses remained unlikely given the extent of his misconduct and the limited resources available through his post-prison employment prospects. The policy changes implemented by local law enforcement and regulatory agencies included enhanced oversight of small businesses within immigrant communities, improved coordination between financial institutions and community organizations for detecting potential fraud, and specialized training for investigators dealing with crimes that involved cultural factors and community relationships that might complicate traditional approaches to law enforcement and victim support. The therapeutic innovations that emerged from working with these families included culturally sensitive approaches to marriage counseling, specialized interventions for children dealing with family scandal and community stigma, and community-based support programs that balance traditional cultural values with American legal and social frameworks for addressing moral conflicts and criminal activities. The professional development programs that were established for counselors and social workers included training in cultural competency, understanding immigrant family dynamics, and addressing the intersection of personal relationships and financial crimes within close-knit communities where business and social relationships were often intertwined in ways that could complicate both prevention and recovery efforts. The ongoing research initiatives funded through victim advocacy organizations continued to study the long-term impact of financial crimes and adultery on immigrant families, while also developing prevention strategies and community education programs that might help other families avoid similar destructive conflicts and criminal activities that could devastate multiple generations and community relationships. The 5-year follow-up study conducted by Social Services revealed the complex long-term outcomes for all participants in the case, demonstrating both remarkable resilience and ongoing challenges as they continued to rebuild their lives while managing the lasting consequences of decisions that had affected not only their immediate families but also the broader Indian American community that had provided both support and judgment throughout their recovery process. Rohit's remarriage to Dr. Priya Singh, a pediatrician he met through professional networking in Dallas, represented his successful transition to a new life while maintaining his commitment to providing stability for Kavya through consistent co-parenting with Anjali and ongoing involvement in her cultural education and academic development. Though the new relationship required careful navigation of community expectations and cultural protocols for second marriages within traditional Indian social frameworks. Anjali's decision to remain single while focusing on her career advancement and Kavya's upbringing reflected her recognition that the community stigma associated with her affair would make finding an appropriate partner within their traditional cultural framework extremely difficult, while her personal growth through therapy had led her to prioritize emotional honesty and individual authenticity over community expectations and social conformity that had contributed to her feelings of entrapment and dissatisfaction during her marriage to Rohit. Kavya's academic excellence and social adjustment by age 16 demonstrated remarkable resilience despite the family trauma she had experienced, though her therapy sessions continued to address complex questions about trust, family loyalty, and cultural identity as she prepared for college and began forming her own understanding of relationships, marriage, and the balance between individual desires and community obligations that had been central to her parents' conflicts and ultimate divorce. The community's evolution in response to this scandal included the development of more nuanced approaches to supporting families in crisis while maintaining cultural values and social cohesion, with enhanced emphasis on preventive counseling, financial transparency in marriages, and community education about recognizing and addressing the warning signs of emotional distance and moral conflicts that could escalate into destructive behaviors if not addressed through appropriate intervention and support. Daniel Mehta's post-prison life was marked by ongoing struggles with employment, social isolation, and estrangement from his children who had been permanently affected by his criminal activities and the destruction of their family's financial security and social standing, serving as a stark reminder of the comprehensive consequences that could result from personal moral failures that escalated into systematic criminal behavior affecting multiple families and community relationships. The professional and academic research that continued to emerge from this case contributed to enhanced understanding of how cultural pressures and community expectations could both protect against and contribute to moral conflicts, criminal activities, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and community support strategies for immigrant families, navigating complex intersections of traditional values and American social frameworks. The victim advocacy work that grew from this case included specialized programs for supporting families affected by financial crimes that originated in personal relationships, with particular attention to the cultural factors and community dynamics that could complicate both prevention efforts and recovery processes for individuals and families dealing with the intersection of adultery, criminal activity, and social stigma within tight-knit immigrant communities. The legal precedents established through the prosecution and civil litigation phases of this case continued to influence how similar crimes would be investigated and prosecuted, particularly regarding the treatment of cultural factors, community impact, and victim compensation in cases involving financial fraud that exploited personal relationships and community trust within immigrant business networks and social organizations. The ongoing monitoring and evaluation of intervention strategies developed in response to this case provided valuable data about the effectiveness of different approaches to preventing and addressing moral conflicts and criminal activities within cultural communities, while also contributing to the development of best practices for supporting families through crisis and recovery processes that respected traditional values while addressing contemporary challenges and legal requirements. The educational initiatives that were implemented in schools and community organizations included age-appropriate programs for teaching young people about healthy relationships, financial responsibility, and ethical decision-making that honored cultural values while preparing them to navigate American social and legal frameworks that might create conflicts with traditional expectations and community standards. The economic impact study, conducted 5 years after the initial discovery, revealed that the total financial cost of Daniel's crimes and their consequences had exceeded €800,000 in direct losses, legal expenses, therapeutic services, and lost business opportunities, demonstrating the far-reaching economic consequences of personal moral failures that escalated into criminal activity, affecting multiple families and community institutions. The policy recommendations that emerged from comprehensive analysis of this case included enhanced oversight of small businesses within immigrant communities, improved coordination between law enforcement agencies and community organizations, and strengthened support services for families dealing with the intersection of personal relationships and financial crimes that could devastate both individual families and broader community relationships. The psychological research findings that resulted from long-term follow-up studies with all affected family members contributed to enhanced understanding of resilience factors and recovery processes for individuals and families dealing with betrayal, financial crime, and community stigma, while also providing insights into the cultural factors that could either facilitate or complicate healing and social reintegration after experiencing traumatic violations of trust and community standards. 10 years after Rohit Sharma discovered his wife Anjali in that downtown Houston hotel room with their neighbor Daniel Mehta, the ripple effects of that afternoon continue to influence not only the individuals directly involved, but also the broader Indian American community that struggled to understand how traditional values and modern American life could create such devastating conflicts between personal desires, family obligations, and moral accountability that ultimately destroyed multiple families and challenged fundamental assumptions about cultural preservation and social adaptation. The transformation of all the principal figures in this tragedy demonstrates both the resilience of the human spirit and the lasting consequences of moral choices that affect not only individual lives, but entire communities. Rohit's successful second marriage and thriving consulting practice in Dallas represent his ability to rebuild trust and professional credibility while maintaining his commitment to cultural values and family responsibilities, though his relationship with Kavya continues to require careful attention to the ongoing impact of their family's disruption on her development and cultural identity. Anjali's evolution from traditional Indian wife to independent American professional reflects the complex intersection of personal growth and social consequence that characterized her journey through scandal, divorce, and community rejection toward a new understanding of individual authenticity and personal responsibility that honored both her cultural heritage and her need for emotional fulfillment, though her choices came at enormous cost to her family relationships and community standing. The permanent exile of Daniel Mehta from the community that once respected him as a successful businessman serves as a stark reminder that moral failures and criminal activities can result in consequences that extend far beyond legal punishment to include complete social and economic destruction that affects not only the perpetrator, but also innocent family members whose lives are forever changed by adult decisions that prioritize personal gratification over community responsibility and family welfare. Kavya's remarkable academic achievement and social adjustment, despite the trauma of family scandal and divorce, demonstrate the possibility of resilience and recovery when children receive appropriate support and guidance, though her ongoing therapy and counseling address complex questions about trust, cultural identity, and moral decision-making that will influence her understanding of relationships and community obligations throughout her adult life. The community's response to this tragedy has included significant changes in approaches to marriage counseling, financial oversight, and early intervention for families experiencing cultural conflicts or emotional distance that might escalate into destructive behaviors, with enhanced emphasis on prevention and support services that balance traditional values with contemporary understanding of psychological health and relationship dynamics. The legal and policy changes that emerged from this case continue to influence how law enforcement agencies and social services address crimes that involve the intersection of personal relationships and financial misconduct within immigrant communities, with improved coordination between cultural organizations and legal authorities that respects community values while ensuring accountability for criminal activities that affect multiple families and social institutions. The academic research and professional development initiatives that grew from studying this case have contributed to enhanced understanding of cultural factors in mental health treatment, criminal behavior, and community recovery processes, while also providing frameworks for addressing similar situations in other immigrant communities facing comparable challenges in balancing traditional values with American social and legal expectations. The victim advocacy and support services that were developed in response to this case continue to provide specialized assistance for families affected by financial crimes that originate in personal relationships, with particular attention to cultural factors and community dynamics that can complicate both prevention efforts and recovery processes for individuals and families dealing with betrayal, financial loss, and social stigma. The ongoing impact of this case extends beyond the immediate participants to include broader changes in community awareness, prevention strategies, and support systems that protect vulnerable families while preserving cultural values and social cohesion, demonstrating that even the most devastating personal tragedies can ultimately contribute to positive social change when communities respond with wisdom, compassion, and commitment to learning from painful experiences. The story of Rohit, Anjali, Daniel, and their families serves as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception and moral compromise, and an inspiring example of human resilience and community response in the face of devastating betrayal and loss, reminding us that while individual choices can have far-reaching consequences for entire communities, the capacity for healing, growth, and positive change remains possible, even after the most painful violations of trust and cultural values. The legacy of this case continues through the families who have been protected by enhanced prevention programs, the communities that have developed more effective support systems for families in crisis, and the broader understanding of how cultural traditions and modern pressures can interact to create both vulnerability and strength in immigrant families, navigating complex intersections of traditional expectations and American opportunities for individual growth and social mobility.